Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the JayBee and Milly channel. I'm JayBee and joining me is Sophie.
Hey.
And the special guest that we'll be interviewing today is Mr. Victor Cook. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, glad to be here.
So it's so incredible. Like, honestly, your filmography is one iconic show, one iconic movie after another. It's absolutely incredible. But you mentioned something to us before, setting up the interview that actually really fascinated me, and that was that Bob Singer, who, people watching this will recognize from their work, and of course the interviews prior. Like, he's taught you for storyboarding back in the 1980s. So I wanted to ask what this experience was like.
Yeah, so before I got into animation, I had I have to start a little bit before that. So but before I got into animation, when I was in college, an art teacher was just noticing that I would never just do a straight life drawing. When we had the models, I would put bat wings on them or turn them into monsters. I would use the pose, but turn them into something else. And she had told me she had a former student that had gone on to work at Hanna-Barbera. And by the way, this is in like Central California. It's so far removed from Hollywood. It's like, so she gave me his number and said, if you're ever down in Southern California, you should look this guy up. And strangely, I wasn't really interested in animation at that time. I wanted to be a print cartoonist. So I just tucked his number away. But about 4 or 5 years later, I decided to just call him. This is before the internet, so cold called him. And he recommended that I went to Cal State Long Beach as an art major. He recommended that I check out and maybe take a class at the Animation Guild, which is the animation union in Burbank. He said it's taught by professionals, and they will give you sort of like, you'll get real world samples of storyboards or character design or whatever class you take. It'll help you get a job. So I signed up, and my second class was storyboard, and it was Bob Singer. And this guy, just an amazing artist. I don't think he remembers me. He's had so many people come through his class, and this was in the sort of like 1987 maybe when I took this class. And just an excellent all-around artist. If you looked at his filmography, he's done every type of job: design, art direction, layout, story direction. And so as a kid, he did a lot of shows I watched as a kid, in the 60s. And I was such a fan of Space Ghost and Johnny Quest and the Fantastic Four show that H&B did in the 60s. And he worked on all of them. So it was amazing to have this guy as a teacher.
Yeah, 100%. And given, his filmography, that was very impressive even back then. Are there any lessons that you learned from him or from your education in general that has stuck with you for the longest?
Well, it's interesting, the assignments in these storyboard classes, and I was thinking about this last night. His Hanna-Barbera filmography, he worked in every genre, right? It wasn't just the funny shows, right? He worked on like the action adventure shows. He worked on everything, but I think he's more associated, I think, with a lot of the funnier shows just because they made more of them. But the class, it seemed like it was geared more like to straight filmmaking when I think back on it. I don't remember doing a lot of gag assignments. But one of the assignments he gave that really stood out was they assigned us pages from The Raven, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. They didn't give us a script. Other assignments had a script. This was just like, here's read these pages out of a paperback book and now visualize it. So that was a great lesson. And there's no screen direction when you're just reading prose, right? You have to like come up with in your head what the shots are going to be and how are you going to make it spooky and scary. And so that was a great lesson. Another thing that stuck with me from those early classes was that your storyboard, the way you stage and direct what's going to happen, really has to make sense without sound. You really have to be able, the audience has to really be able to follow along and understand what's going on watching the picture. So you could really confuse the audience by sort of bad staging and bad direction. So those are the few things that kind of stuck with me since those early classes with Bob.
That's just fascinating to hear all about that. And especially in regards to all the storyboarding, like with you having studied that and learning quite a lot about it, from that point of view, did you imagine yourself being in storyboarding for the long haul, or was that with the eventual goal of becoming a director and producer as you did later on?
Yeah, at that time, I wasn't thinking about directing or producing. My first job was as an in-betweener and then as an assistant animator at Filmation. And as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a print cartoonist. And I was doing submitting comic strips to the various syndicates back then. When I got hired at Filmation, the studio was really divided up by departments. Like when you go into a studio now, at least a TV animation studio, everybody's kind of mixed together. You know, your office, if you're a storyboarder artist, your office could be next door to a background painter or an editor or something like that. But back then it was very much like, you know, bottom floor was like, you know, the ink and paint and camera department. Then the next floor above may be the in-between department. Above that would be layout. And above that would be the storyboard department. So I was given a tour and I saw the storyboard department. And back then the boards were done on paper still, pencil and paper, and 3 panels to a page. And it appeared to me to look like a comic strip. And so I was sort of attracted to it and for that reason. And so that's when I took the storyboard class. I had gotten in as an in-betweener. And while I was working at Filmation, I took these classes at night with Bob in storyboard. Initially, because like I said, it reminded me of comic strips, but it really isn't about like being a comic strip. It's you know, filmmaking. And the dream was to be a storyboard artist back then.
Wow, what awesome insights. From your IMDb, we see that your first credit as director and producer was for the 101 Dalmatian series. How did this come about?
It came about, oh gosh, it's always like connect the dots. I mean, the fast answer is I was at Disney TV Animation for about 5 or 6 years doing storyboards and, you know, feeling like I was living the dream, just being doing storyboards, loving doing storyboards. And eventually, you know, the studios, you know, how people become directors in TV is usually from the storyboards. But I will say the idea and the goal to be a director came after I was at Disney. You know, it wasn't way back when I was taking the classes, you know. I got hired onto Tailspin. I don't know if you guys remember that show, a Disney afternoon show. And the producer of that show gave this pep talk at the beginning of the season where he was sort of, you know, hey, everybody, learn each other's jobs. So you learn how things work and how everything's made, you know. Character designers learn what the production people do. Production people learn what the writers do. Storyboard guys learn what the editors do. And I was brand new, and I just sort of, I don't know how seriously everybody else took it, but I just like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I signed up for a UCLA extension class in animation script writing with not the intention to ever be a writer, but just I was just doing what the producer said, learning another aspect of the animation business. And one of the final assignments in that class was to write a script based on a real show. It wasn't about make up your own show. You know, they wanted to see you do a spec script based on a show, and Disney was developing Darkwing Duck at the time. And I love superheroes. Darkwing Duck, you know, the funny superhero show. And so I thought, oh, that'll be my assignment. And then around the time I was finishing the class, I was actually on Darkwing Duck as a storyboard artist. And I kind of overheard some writers talking about they just got picked up for more episodes. They're going to be on ABC as well as the Disney Afternoon. They're looking for scripts. And so I just approached one of the story editors and pitched my script, and they said, yeah, we'll do your script. You can write your script. And the creator of Darkwing Duck His name is Tad Stones. Super busy guy. I can't remember if I really spoke to him that much. He was like just so busy. He was running over 65 half hours of a show. And but after I did the script, I also ended up storyboarding on my own script. I got a knock on my door at the office, and it was Tad popping his head in asking, "Hey, have you ever thought about directing? You know, you wrote this script and you're a storyboard artist. These things kind of, for him, felt like it goes together, and that's the kind of sort of experience that he would be looking for a future director." So that kind of planted the seed of me having the ambition to be a director. So sorry for the super long answer, but that's kind of how that led up to 101 Dalmatians.
No, that's fantastic. And I definitely am so grateful that that seed was planted, because I am a complete fanatic when it comes to, I suppose, another thing that you directed and produced a bit later on after 101 Dalmatians, which is the Lilo and Stitch series. I think when I was a kid, there was at one point where I could rattle off the name of 50 of the experiments just without even referring to anything. I've got my Stitch mug here in like commemoration. But in terms of that, with Lilo and Stitch being based off a pre-established universe in movie form, when that came to directing and producing the show, did it make it any easier or maybe even more difficult having, I guess, a universe already established out there?
Well, it's a mixed bag, you know. Let me go back to 101 Dalmatians. Even though there was a 101 Dalmatians movie, animated movie in the early 60s, our show wasn't based on that art style, you know. So we were sort of reinterpreting and doing our own thing, and it kind of freed us up to simplify it for TV in a lot of ways. And also with the new art style and art direction that we did that show in, it kind of manages, I think, audience expectations that you're not tuning in to see that early 60s 101 Dalmatians movie. You're seeing this brand new thing. With Lilo and Stitch, the series was almost like it's a sequel to the movie. You know, it's an episodic sequel to the movie. So it's easier in the sense of the research it's already exists. We have the movie for art direction and design and the style and how the characters act and behave. We have all that stuff to work with. The thing that made it hard was our schedule and budget. You know, the audience may be expecting it to look at that same animation level as a feature film because it's kind of a sequel to that. So that was the challenging part, is to sort of on our time and budget present and put out and produce as great of episodes of this Lilo and Stitch as possible. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely honored the movie in such a great way, but more than that, it stands on its own 2 feet as being fantastic in and of itself. Like the design and concept of those experiments alone kind of all became like so iconic. I wish I could get like little figurines and plushies of all of the little experiments. But in terms of your memories, you know, going back from that Lilo and Stitch series, are there any particular episodes or I guess concepts for experiments that stand out to you as being particularly memorable?
Yeah, they were all super fun, all super different, you know, and hats off to the executive producers, Jess Winfield, Tony Craig, Bob Scanaway. They're the ones who developed the show and came up with the concept for the series. But let's see, I would say Slushy kind of stands out to me a little bit. I think mostly because it was culminated into a showdown between him and Splody Head. So you had sort of this experiment with ice powers versus this experiment with, you know, heat ray powers. So it was really fun, and that was very interesting to do. And Sprout was another one that I super really enjoyed. And you know, one of the episodes that stood out, I didn't direct it. It was directed by Don McKinnon, but it was called Cannonball. It's an experiment that creates kind of like big splashes and tidal waves. And man, that had to be, by the time that animation came back, I think a real sort of tsunami or typhoon or something happened at that time. I can't remember where, somewhere in the Far East or the Southeast Asia, and So we had to like, tone it down and do a lot of retakes to kind of like soften all that at that time. So that I do remember that kind of stands out as a memory too.
Oh wow! Thank you so much for sharing that. That is incredible. Thank you.
Another beloved show that you've worked on is The Spectacular Spider Man. How did you come up to work on the show?
Yeah, so this is another one where I got to go back to a little backstory, and I would say it also starts at Disney TV Animation. I was the. Do you know of a show called Disney's Gargoyles? Have you heard of that show?
I think my
So
brother
Disney's
watched it.
Gargoyles
Yeah.
was a very straight, dramatic show in the 90s. Has a very big following. It was created by Greg Weisman, this writer, Greg Weisman. And we became friends and colleagues back at Disney and worked together after Gargoyles on a couple of shows, Buzz Lightyear, and there was an Atlantis TV show that we had started that we didn't get to finish that we worked on. So we together started like developing some shows of our own together that we wanted to pitch out. Anyway, we kind of developed this rapport and kind of seemed like we were on the same page on a lot of the creative things we wanted to do. So he got hired to be head of story and a producer on The Spectacular Spider Man. And when they were looking for someone to head up the visual and directing part of it, he recommended me. So that's really how I got onto The Spectacular Spider Man.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, it does blow my mind to no end to just have you here in general, because I remember like being so obsessed with Lilo and Stitch when I was a kid, and then going into my early teens being obsessed with Spectacular Spider-Man, and it's kind of like so many of the things that you've just been involved with has instantly turned to gold. And so when I think about Spectacular Spider-Man, I'm kind of keen to know if there's any favorite memories that you have from working on the behind the scenes of that show at all.
Oh yeah, that show was such a labor of love. So there's all these different various iterations of Spider-Man. So this is one we got to do how we wanted to see him. So everybody now sees the current movies and sees that Spider-Man as a high school student. But strangely, if you go back to our show before the Spectacular Spider-Man and all the animated shows up to that point, he was never a high school student. It's strange to think about now. He was always in college but he was never high school age. And the original Stanley Ditko era of Spider-Man, he was a high school student. And so we wanted to do that. So it was sort of the fun of bringing that Ditko era, early original Spider-Man up to date to 2008, up to date of that era, and sort of reinterpreting it for modern times. And the show's set in New York, and if you've watched the show, you've noticed we wanted to sort of reimagine the ethnicities of some of the various supporting characters to sort of reflect the population of New York City, which I see that the modern movies have done the same thing. I see that happening. And also, the Raimi movies had been out, and the action sequences were amazing. And if you go back and look at the comic books, all the posing and the action in the comics were amazing. I can't say from an animation point of view, I don't feel like I really saw super amazing choreographed action scenes in the animated show before. I mean, I love the original 1960 Spider-Man, mostly for that theme music, and just seeing him swing around and land on buildings and punch a guy, was enough when you were a kid. But on this show, we really wanted to really up the choreography and be super creative with how he used his powers, and so that is a fun memory as working on all that to bring that out. And just thinking what can we do to make, what else we could do to make this different from before, from a visual point of view for me. And it was just kind of looking at those Ditko era sort of graphic symbolisms he would use, where you'd see the cityscape and then you'd see the Spider-Man web designs in the sky from his costume, or you'd see Peter Parker and see the half Spidey mask kind of come on for a bit as he's thinking about what happened the night before. So it's sort of injecting all those things into the animated show was really fun.
Oh, it was definitely.
And another great memory is we actually had Stan Lee,
Oh.
the co-creator of Spectacular Spider-Man, do a cameo in our season 2 Mysterio episode. So it was a big day, a huge event when he came to the recording studio and recorded. I've got to find it. I have footage of. I probably have hours of footage on my camcorder that I recorded of us with Stan Lee that day.
Oh, that is crazy. I remember catching that episode and just like kind of losing my mind because he has the type of voice that you instantly, like, even if it looked nothing like him, you recognized it. And it's such a testament to the longevity and how beloved Spectacular Spider-Man was, in that, we kind of got a glimpse about the new animated Spider-Man movie, and there's half a glimpse that you can see of Spectacular Spider-Man, and the kind of world lost its mind. Like, never mind this new thing coming out, that's Spectacular Spider-Man. But the acknowledgement of that version of the character, I mean, does this give you any hope that the show could be brought back in some capacity?
I know everybody would like that to happen. I'd like that to happen. I don't. I can't say I hold out. If it happens, great, but I'm not hoping. I think it's just so many legal ownership issues involved between 2 studios, and if they ever decide to work it out someday and want to make the show, that's fantastic. They would have to they'd have to have something driving them to want to do that. But if they do it, please give me a call.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, you've worked on so many incredible shows, and one of which is Scooby Mystery Incorporated, which is definitely a fan favourite and we all love it. How did you come to work on that series?
Oh, wow. So, you'll notice a lot of these things happen. It's like through, there's so interconnections. The art teacher who says to call this guy, and years later I call this guy, and or I'm working with this writer on this, and then 5 years later it somehow leads to that. Very similarly, our line producer on the Spectacular Spider-Man, after the show ended, he went to Warner Brothers, and about a few months later he had let me know, hey, they're doing this new Scooby-Doo show, and they're looking for directors, and I mentioned you to them, and they're interested in meeting you. So I went in, and of course, at the time in my head, the Scooby-Doo I'm thinking is the usual Scooby-Doo, like the original, where it's a comedy show. You think about the limited animation, the same background going by as they're running down the hallways. So that's kind of what I had in my head. And when I came in and met the producers, like what they had in mind for the show and what they were pitching for the show was, yes, it was Scooby-Doo, but it was like, but what if these monsters were real? And it's Scooby-Doo, but no, the staging isn't flat, sort of limited animation staging that was done originally, when it first came out, flat left to right staging. It was like, no, let's stage this cinematically. Let's stage this like an action show. And one of the other projects I had worked on was also Hellboy, Blood and Iron. And, they had my reel that had clips of all these various shows, and I think the studio and the producers were looking at a combination of my clips from Spectacular and Hellboy, and thought, yeah, we like him to work on the show. And I initially came on as one of 2 directors on the show, and within a couple of months, the producer of the show, Tony Cervoni, was heading up 2 series at the time. So he asked, hey, would you want to be a supervising director and take on more of the responsibility on this first season? And then that led to me becoming a producer on the second season.
It is crazy. I mean, you've mentioned how one thing kind of led to another, and it was almost kind of a domino effect. But you know, of course, with you being taught by Bob Singer, who was so pivotal in the original series, and with you having such a monumental role in, I think, what people consider the definitive modern interpretation, did it ever feel like a passing of the torch to you, or a continuing of that Scooby-Doo legacy?
I don't know. I mean, now that you put it to me that way, I can look back and say, yeah, that was, and it you know, and by the way, you know, the other director of the show is Kurt Gaeta. He and I directed half the episodes each, almost. I think, you know, except for maybe a dozen, but we did the bulk of them. We split them, and I met Kurt in those storyboard classes back in the day before before he even got hired in animation. I think it was just before he got his first jobs in animation. And so, yeah, not just me, but probably a lot of other crew members who went into the industry after taking those classes had ended up working not on Mystery Incorporated, maybe some other iteration of Scooby. So it is a passing of the torch in a way. And by the way, I want to mention a little more about Kurt. The guy was a super amazing director. You know, so you know, big action adventure background. He directed one of my favorite DVDs, the Batman Beyond DVD he did is just incredible. And his episodes of Scooby-Doo, Mystery Incorporated, just, you know, masterpieces, I want to say, you know.
Oh, I mean, it is great. The whole crew behind Mystery Incorporated is just, it's just so amazing, and it definitely, like, the tone of the show is amazing. I think it's definitely things that we often refer back to when it comes to even conversations about stuff being released now. But you mentioned that you were a producer for season 2 and a director for season 1 and 2. Did you ever find that it was easier to direct an episode that you produced, or vice versa?
Well, you know, being a producer there in that project means you're seeing the episode all the way to the finish line, to delivery. When you're just directing, usually that means you're seeing your episode through the animatic of your storyboard, and then it's done. And you aren't always having as direct influence on maybe some other phases of the show. So yeah, producing gives you the opportunity to completely see a project from beginning to end. So, you know, I get to spot the music score with the composer. I would do that with Mitch. So it'd be Mitch and I episodically working with the composer, Rob Kral, and it'd be in sort of spotting the sound effects with the sound effects editor, and then being at the final mix. So you get to sort of like follow it through. So it's, yeah, I just consider, you know, producing on the show or being a supervising director on a show as you get to sort of like see it all the way through. You know.
Are there any episodes that you look back on as being particularly memorable?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I mentioned Kurt earlier. I want to mention 2 of his episodes that I thought were amazing. His first one was Creeping Creatures of the Night. Creeping Creatures, and that just really like set to me, that just gave the audience right off the bat, hey, this is not the old Scooby-Doo, you know, amazing. And then he did another one called The Night the Clown Died, and just incredible. You know, his action adventure background really was so important to the show, and really helped tell these stories. For the ones that I specifically worked on as a director, you know, ones that stand out to me a lot. One was Howl of the Fright Hound, and one of the reasons why that stood out is great story, great art direction, all the usual greatness of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. But there was sort of an Act 3 showdown involving Scooby and the Mecha Hound, the monster, and I remember thinking, and we had a palette mover in the episode. I go, it's not in the script, but man, this will be so fun to sort of homage Alien 2 here, get Scooby in this palette mover to fight the Fright Hound. So that's why that kind of stands out for me. Another one is the Shrieking Madness. And I think you've had Mitch Watson here as a guest, right? So he may have talked about this, I think. I don't know. I didn't see the interview, but the Shrieking Madness featured Harlan Ellison as a guest star. He voiced himself, and that made it so memorable because he was quite a character there at the recording studio. And All Fear the Freak, the season 1 finale, was super fun to direct. It was another one that really tells anybody if you just happen to tune in to Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated after watching previous iterations, you're like, wow, this is very layered. All the backstory and the drama, along with the comedy that goes with Scooby-Doo. It is in the cinematics. It's a great example of an episode that is a fantastic example of a SDMI Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated episode. And Heart of Evil, I loved because it featured the Blue Falcon and Dynamite, but mostly, because I'm a geek about Johnny Quest. I just loved that show as a kid. And so we had a brief cameo of Dr. Quest and Race Bannon in the prologue. And so that was super fun. And then the season finale, Come Undone. I got to direct that one, and literally all hell breaks loose in that one, and I just loved our ending, where you realize this whole show was a prequel to the original show. So a lot of great memories of the crew too. By the way, Derek Wyatt did a fantastic job. Sort of updating, kind of retaining the look and vibe of the original character designs, but like bringing it up to date and making it so sharp and animatable. Dan Kroll, the background design, the art direction, amazing. Everybody involved, Mitch and Tony, the voice actors, incredible show to work on.
Well, every episode I just named was a brilliant episode. I mean, there's not a bad one in the series. It's pretty much perfection. In as much detail as you can, what is the process like for directing and producing the series until you eventually see as an audience member?
Well, let's say the show's developed, right? We're getting ready to, you're going to start, the script is done. Let's say the script is finished. So the process is, if you're directing it, you read the script and you start imagining how you would like to visualize the script, and you maybe do some thumbnails here and there to help convey that to your various storyboard artists. On a show like Scooby-Doo, I think we had 3 storyboard artists per half hour. They each did an act, and you kind of get to know these guys over the course of making the show, or over the course of the years of past shows. If you've worked with them, you kind of know where they really have a passion in storyboarding to do. Some of them they love the acting. Some of them love the action. Some of them love chase sequences or whatever, and you try to cast them per their strengths or their wants in that way, so you kind of get the best episode. And so you try to guide them in kind of the staging or the action, the kind of things you want with some thumbnails, but you want to leave room for them to bring their ideas into the storyboard. And they will first do a rough pass. You get the roughs, and that's your chance as a director to then make notes on the panels or sequences that you want to be a certain way that maybe the storyboard artist didn't hit. and you a lot of times you would be at the recording, so and you would help give notes in that regard to the type of acting, or to make sure, hey, if the characters are actually far apart, that they shouldn't talk just like normal, like we should project, simple things like that. And then the storyboard comes back, you make one last final pass of staging, directing, action, or acting notes. It's all, and you're drawing it all out, by the way, even if it's a rough or thumbnail. It's not really finger pointing. It's not like you're on a set and say, can you stand there just to an inch, or can you raise your hand a little bit like that. It's like, no, you have to draw it. So if you get a storyboard rough and you think the staging isn't dramatic enough, it's not as simple as you just saying, hey, can you make this more dramatic? I mean, if we had a lot more time, you could, if we were making a movie, but in a TV show, it's very sort of regimented in where we have spaces to do things, to get things done. So the storyboard artist, for example, on this show, I think they had 5 weeks to do a storyboard. So they needed to be able to rough this storyboard in about 2.5 weeks, and spend the other 2 to 2.5 weeks sort of cleaning it up. So if at after you got the roughs, the first 2.5 weeks, if you write a note, hey, can you make it more dramatic? You're sort of like putting the storyboard artist in this position to go back to his desk and like think about how to make it more, and rough it again when he should be cleaning up. So you try to give those notes ahead of time in your thumbnails, and then if you didn't, and you get this board in the roughs, you really want to then draw that for him. So all he has to do is clean it up. So it's a lot of drawing involved. And that's why a lot of the directors come up from being storyboard artists themselves. And then it goes overseas to be animated, and we have handout meetings with the overseas artists as well to kick off the show. Then as the scenes come back, is a process we calling retakes to get the animation how we want it. Sometimes we want a little more squash and stretch depending on the style of the show, and some shows want to be very realistic and not have that. Just depends on like what the style of the show you're working on. And then during that time you're editing the show. We usually ship a show, I think, about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes longer than it would air. And so you tighten it all down to show length. And then you start spotting it for the rest of the sound, like I was mentioning earlier, the sound effects and the music, and then do the final mix. So from script to, I think, having a finished episode, it could be probably 6 to 7 months for a TV show.
Oh wow, it's so incredible to hear that process and how we eventually get to what we see, readily available, which is very easy to take for granted from an audience perspective. It's just download this episode, press the play button. But it's so like it's amazing to hear about every detail that goes into what we would eventually see in that kind of audience perspective. But I suppose the other side to that potentially is what we may not see. So I wanted to ask if there's any unused concepts or storylines or anything of that nature that you may remember from, the Mystery Incorporated series. I know we hear about Velma and Hot Dog Water, potentially that getting watered down, but is there anything of that nature that you recall?
Well, from when I got it, when I got it would be from sort of like the final record script on. I mean, I would see all the early drafts of the script, but sort of in the development phase, that kind of happened before me. So I really don't know if there were things that were planned that did not happen. It seemed like by the time we were making the show, it seemed like everything that was planned happened. I mean, on a smaller scale, maybe design-wise, you try a lot of different takes of what the monster could look like before you land on the final design. So you're using the final one and obviously not the earlier ones. But I can't think of I can't think of an example
No,
that you
there's no
asked.
problem at all. It
Yeah.
is just incredible to hear about that, because it's honestly a surprise that we did get what we got, because definitely the show goes to some quite dark places, but not too dark. It definitely does such an amazing job being that mature Scooby-Doo show. And more recently within the world of Scooby, there's been a bit of an attempt at that with HBO Max's new Velma show, showing blood, gore, swear words. Anything that you can imagine being in an adult gritty show is there, which, whether that be good or bad, it kind of does show that there are Scooby properties now that have no limits whatsoever. And so to that end, if Mystery Incorporated were to come back, or even if it was just thought of today, how different do you think the show would be that we eventually get, if Mystery Incorporated was beginning production today?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the audience they want to make it for. I haven't seen the show on HBO Max you're talking about. I liked we made a show that everybody could watch. When you mentioned like swear words and things like that, I feel like you can't have kids watch that. At least I wouldn't on TV. I grew up in an era where there used to be just 3 networks, and the primetime shows seemed gritty enough and dramatic enough for any adult to watch. But if you were a kid watching it with your parents, you could still watch it too, whether it was like the Twilight Zone or Mission Impossible or any of these shows. It wasn't like they had to dumb it down to make it like a kiddie show just because kids were in the room. So I feel like that's what we did with Mr. Incorporated. We made a dramatic show for everybody. It wasn't something that a little kid couldn't watch. And on the other hand, it wasn't like it was a show written so young that a teenager and above, an adult, wouldn't enjoy. It was sort of like a primetime show that I remember watching, that had scares and fun. And so, yeah, if we were to have the opportunity to make it again, I don't think I'd want to do an adults only version of it. I would kind of like to keep continuing to make new episodes, kind of like what we did, if given the opportunity.
I mean, you're definitely not alone with that thinking whatsoever. You only need to go on to like the Scooby-Doo side of Twitter right now to see so many tweets saying everything that the Velma show got wrong, Mystery Incorporated got right. And we've spoke about the kind of passing on of the Scooby legacy. So, of course, Bob Singer teaching you, and then you going on to Mystery Incorporated. Say in a hypothetical situation where you're teaching a class of future Scooby-Doo creators, what would your advice be to them about creating, I guess, a Mystery Incorporated, kind of a Scooby-Doo show with more mature themes?
Well, if I were teaching a class, I think I would be teaching a storyboard class. So I think it would be a more general. Sorry, I keep bumping into the laptop. I think it would be, I would probably convey the same information that I got from Bob. And by the way, also, that was my first introduction to storyboards. My education about storyboards happened from all the other directors and producers I went on to work with as I went along from show to show. But I just say, study filmmaking. It applies to comedies, drama, or horror or action. Study filmmaking and make sure, just like Bob said, does this make sense even with the sound off? Are you able to follow it? Is it cinematic? When you're choosing your angles, why are you shooting it from high looking down? Why are you shooting it from low looking up? Make sure you're not just randomly, doing these angles, but it's all part of the storytelling. Don't forget, in an action sequence, besides all the punching and kicking and cool moves, that these are personalities and characters in there that we have to love and care about, or we're just watching a bunch of stuff happening. You have to be scared something bad's going to happen to who you like in this conflict, you know. So I would say study film, you know. As far as anybody who wants to create a Scooby-Doo series someday, I'm not sure what I would tell them, but I remember when I came on to Mr. Incorporated, one of the things that Tony Savoni mentioned to me that I just loved, and he just said, one thing to always remember about Scooby-Doo, the key ingredients is, it just sounded funny to me, but it's so true. He said, fear, food, and flashlights. Make sure we always have fear, food, and flashlights, and that's and then you could do a dramatic version, you could do a scary version, you could do a straight version, you can do a comedy version, you know, as long as you kind of have, don't forget those things that make the show fun.
That's brilliant. Well, after Mystery Incorporated, you directed and produced, well, one of my favourite Scooby-Doo movies, Scooby-Doo Stage Fright. Are there any difference when approaching a feature-length film versus an episode of a show?
Well, you know, the answer is yes. If we were really doing, say, a theatrical feature, this really wasn't that. It was feature length, but it was like a straight to DVD kind of thing, and we really did it almost on a TV schedule. I think where we got more time and schedule was on maybe the animation side of things. We kind of got a little more love and attention on the animation part of it. I think we got a little bit more time on the storyboards too, but it wasn't like we had theatrical feature time. You know, we were pretty much having to do it pretty quickly. So it was very much the same approach. You know, I was actually working with a lot of the same storyboard guys, so you're still casting these sequences in these various parts to people's strengths and what they bring to it. So it's very similar. But I imagine if I had a chance to work on a theatrical version, it would be different. I think you spend a lot more time working out the story and the staging, and maybe getting to try maybe a few different ways of executing a sequence. But really, you know, in TV and in that project, you sort of you get like one shot and you can kind of revise it during the rough phase, but you got to really prepare and kind of know how you want to do it ahead of time, because it's just the nature of the schedule.
Do you have any favorite memories from working on that Stage Fright movie at all?
Yeah, well, actually, this may sound silly, but the most fun part of that project to me was the main title sequence. I love the main title sequence, you know, because you know, it was just sort of reimagining the characters again in a different sort of an art direction. The character designer who designed Kim Possible, Steve Silver, designed the main title designs, and the background look was Kenny Tompkins and Steve Nicodemus. And so that was just a blast. I would love to have been able to do a series of shorts or even a series based on the main title designs of that show. But that was probably my most fun memory, was working out the main title sequence.
It definitely is very iconic, and it has been a pleasure to talk with you about previous projects that you've been involved with today. But in terms of things going forward, I mean, you mentioned wanting to do another Scooby like there in that moment, but I mean, if they were to revive Mystery Incorporated for season 3, or any other Scooby thing that you could get your hands on at the moment, would that be something that would interest you, or would you be more interested in going forward with, I guess, something that you've not worked on yet?
Well, I mean, the answer is yes to both. You know, I mean, if they were going to do another season of Scooby, and if and a lot of the original key producers were still involved, Tony and Mitch, I'd love to. You know, I'd love to work on that. But yeah, I love working on original content as well. You know, I mean, like I mentioned at the top of this interview, Bob Singer, looking at his the credits that he did for Hanna-Barbera, he did every genre they did there. Most of it was the comedy stuff because that's what they mostly did. But for he did the Jetsons, he did Johnny Quest, two very different shows, and so that sort of kind of stayed with me as I went on, to oh, maybe I won't just do this type of show only all the time, or this type of show only all the time, sort of experience different genres and different styles and different shows. So yeah, doing another Scooby would be great, but doing something original would be great too.
I mean, is there anything that you've kind of got on the horizons or coming soon that you can share with us today, please?
Yeah, I'm working on a Disney Junior show called Pupstruction. It's been announced, so I'm not letting any cats out of the bag by mentioning that. I'm not sure exactly of the premiere date, but we're working on the show now. And but as far as almost everything else I've worked on, it's all on various streaming channels. I've noticed, shows I've storyboarded for Disney, or early shows I directed for Disney is all on Disney Plus. Spectacular Spider Man now is on Disney Plus. You can get Stretch Armstrong and the Flex Fighters on Netflix. So that's the kind of fun about the streaming, is it's everywhere now.
I mean, I'm definitely so looking forward to the future of your work, considering that you've literally, I mean, I can say that confidently for Spider Man and Scooby Doo, that you've been involved with the golden versions of both those things. So I'm really looking forward to see what else you come up with. And I'm sure that people watching this will definitely be looking forward to that too. So where's the kind of best place that people can find you and keep up to date with all that?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm still on Twitter. My do you call it a handle? I'm not sure what you call it, but
the Twitter handle or the
Twitter address handle is at Victor_Cook1, the number 1. And so I post things there every once in a while that you can follow me there.
Well, that's absolutely incredible. I'll definitely be sure to put that on the screen and to link that in the description down below as well. And that's all the questions that we had for you today. Thank you so much for joining. It has genuinely been definitely a dream come true. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you guys. And this is very fun. So thanks for having me. And thanks to everybody out there who still remembers Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. It was an amazing crew who worked on the show. And they poured their love of the project into it, and we're just so happy you guys all still remember the show so fondly.
Oh, thank you so much. It definitely will be remembered for so many years to come. It may even be the first Scooby-Doo show that I introduce my kids, grandkids to in the future, so it definitely will live on. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you so much to Sophie for joining today. It's an absolute pleasure to do these with you. So I'll leave Sophie's Instagram and her socials in the description down below as well. And thank you to everyone for watching this. If you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.